Hi, how are you doing, folks? What we're going to do now is we're going to start talking Chapter 8, Conflict Theory, okay? Again, to kind of put this all in perspective, we started out saying, okay, society is a system, a set of interrelated parts. The parts are institutions. We all pretty much agree on that. The question is, what is the nature of the bond among the parts? Structural functionalists say it's cooperation. Of the Durkheim. Parts are working together for the good of the whole system. Marx came along in the 19th century and said, wait a second, I think that conflict or tension is what characterizes the interrelationships of those parts with each other. And so he developed a theory, a conflict theory. You cannot talk about conflict theory without talking about Marx. He's the big gun, okay? So we're going to focus on him. He's our guy. We're going to talk about his view of society. Marx is controversial because he became not only a social scientist, he became a political player. He was trying to foment change, political change with his writings. He was an agent of change. And so he kind of gets involved in polemics, and we'll talk about that. And what's interesting is a lot of people today, I mean, I'm speaking in August of 2016, and Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, has just gone down, lost to Hillary Clinton, but not by a huge margin. He did a lot better than I thought he did, which is a little bit disconcerting to me because I'm a free market capitalist. But that has nothing to do with this, except to say, I need to say this, is that I'll do as objective a presentation on Marx as I can, but I'm not a big conflict follower. I mean, a conflict is a part of social processes, but it's not the dominant theme, I don't think. And I don't like the way Marx's theory got played into policy. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'll try to do the best job I can on this, telling you about his ideas. But you need to know this stuff. You need to know what he's talking about. Okay. Just as Durkheim was influenced by the Industrial Revolution, and Marx was too. Okay, the Industrial Revolution influenced Marx, and what the Industrial Revolution did for Marx, though, is that it gave him his cause, because he was looking at the plight of the worker. Okay, the guy who worked for the industrialist, and these people were working long hours for little wages, and he took up their cause. And so he's talking about, if you hear, if you hear political conversations about let's get the rich, and I mean that stuff, you can trace that back, those ideas back to Marx. So the Industrial Revolution gave him his cause. The French Revolution, though, gave him his method. Now, the French Revolution occurred in 1789, and it was a violent overthrow of the monarchy in France. And Marx liked the way change was achieved. He says, anytime you've got to achieve wholesale social change, you might as well just get it in and get it done. And some people are going to get killed, but that's the price of progress. And so he viewed that he viewed the kind of the collateral damage that comes out of it as a necessary evil. Okay, Marx, so he was influenced by those two things. Now, Marx's theory, if you want to look at his view of the social system, it exists on three levels. I'll just draw. You know what? I'm just going to type it. At the top, well, let me do it this way. I'll draw it. See how this goes. You know what? I ain't going to draw it. That turned out ugly last time. I'll type it. I'm sorry, folks. At the bottom, you have the substructure. Okay, and the substructure is the economic institution. Marx was an economic determinist, and he felt that the economy was the most important institution. Now, when you look at it, at what the economy does for us, I mean, it provides food, clothing, and shelter, things we need to survive. So it is a very important institution. So he was an economic determinist. The economy is the substructure, most important institution. Okay, on top of it, I hope I can do this. Yes, social structure. groups. And the social structure, according to Marx, were social classes. Social classes. Social class for Marx was determined by the role the individual plays in the productive process. The role the individual plays in the productive process. And I'm going to lose that, but I don't care. Okay, productive process. In other words, it's what you do in the economy. The productive processes of the economy, it's what you do in the economy. It's your job. It's your occupation. Okay? And Marx was onto something here. The occupation is a pretty good indicator of your social class membership. Not always, but it's a pretty good indicator. Okay? So if I were to say to you, I'm a neurosurgeon, you're going to think, hey, he's making a lot of money. As opposed to saying, I'm a college teacher, and he doesn't make that much money. And you know about how much education they have and kind of the lifestyle they lead. It's a pretty good indicator. There are some occupations that are not good. Farming is an occupation that doesn't tell you a whole lot. Because you can be a farmer and have 160 acres of hard scrabble land and be in poverty. Or you can be a farmer and have 10,000 acres of river bottom land and be a wealthy man. So being a farmer, being a salesman, it's kind of hard to tell because you can be selling cosmetics at Dillard's and make $10,000 a year, or more than that, $20,000 a year, or you can be selling Learjets and make millions of dollars a year. So salesman is also one that doesn't give us a good indication. But most other occupations, they give a pretty good indication. So I think Marx was on something there. So social structure, it's the class, the social classes. And that is determined by the role you play in the productive processes. Okay. Then at the top, we have the superstructure. And the superstructure consists of all other institutions: educational institution, government, religion, family, and the economy. Oh, not the economy, everything but the economy, those four institutions. So they make up the superstructure. And according to Marx, it is their job that what they do is they justify the status quo. They justify the social structure. They justify the substructure. So you typically find reinforcement by these institutions, okay, on these lower levels. So that's the way Marx saw society, is existing on these three tiers. And when I do it in class, I'll just kind of show you how I do it, but I won't do it because I didn't know how to draw all that stuff in there. But what you have is you've got the superstructure at the top and the social structure. Well, I'm glad I didn't draw this. At the bottom, you have the substructure. Man, that's ugly. Okay, good thing I didn't do that. All right. Now, what I want to do now in talking about Marx is I want to talk about his primary theory, okay? And that is his theory of dialectical, dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism. Okay, the notion of the dialectic comes from Hegel. And Hegel was a social philosopher, a German philosopher, and he came up with this idea, and it's kind of cool. I'll spend just a minute talking about it. He said, anytime somebody has an idea about something, okay, they express it, okay, and that becomes the thesis, okay? The idea is a thesis. So I'm just going to... Now, he said what happens is that people who differ with that idea kind of feel compelled to say something. Maybe you've done that. You've been out with some friends and somebody says, well, I'm pro-choice. I think a woman has the right to choose. And if you're pro-life, you kind of feel compelled to say, well, I think the baby has rights too, right? So it's kind of like you have this thesis okay, this idea, and then as a consequence of the thesis, the opposite idea or the antithesis comes out. But we don't say antithesis because somebody will think we're from Colgate. What we say is antithesis, okay? So you have thesis, antithesis, and then the resulting interaction between an idea and its opposite, thesis, antithesis, is a synthesis. Synthesis. Oh, good grief. How did that happen? A synthesis. You're taking chemistry. You go into the lab, and your chemistry professor says, okay, we're going to synthesize a compound. And what that means is you're going to take two different elements or two different compounds or a compound element, and you're going to put them together and come up with something new. Okay, so we have the thesis and the antithesis. We put them together, and we come up with a middle ground of synthesis. And then that can repeat itself. And then that synthesis becomes a new thesis. So that becomes thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So it can go over and over again. Well, Marx liked that idea. And so he incorporated that into his theory of class struggles, okay? When I say that Marx is a conflict theorist, okay, the main conflict he's focusing on is class conflict, okay? The conflict between rich and poor, okay, the haves and the have-nots. And what he's arguing is that if you talk about this theory of dialectical materialism, what he's saying is materialism is class. What's the difference between a rich person and a poor person? Well, there's a lot of differences, but basically it's stuff, right? It can also be attitudes and beliefs and all that kind of thing. But it's primarily about stuff. How much stuff do you have? How many houses do you own? Or do you own, or do you not own a house? How many cars do you own? Or do you not own a car? I mean, it's differences in stuff. Now, those are important differences, and we'll talk about those when we get into stratification. But my point is this material thing. I got a mosquito here. I got to get it. Missed him. So when you talk about materialism, you talk about class divisions. Marx was a class conflict guy. Okay, so dialectical materialism is talking about the dialectic as it relates to class divisions. Okay, that's what we're going to be focusing on. So let me tell you about this theory of dialectical materialism. We're going to start off under feudalism. Feudalism. Let me tell you a little bit about feudalism. Feudalism is a diffuse form of political and economic organization. Okay, it's when it's spread out. It's not centralized. We experience in Western culture a period of feudalism. And it came about with the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was a strong, centralized government emanating from the city in Italy. Okay, it covered Europe. Okay, up north into Germany. There are Roman ruins in England and the Mediterranean region and North Africa. All that was influenced by this one city, this powerful city. And it fell. 476 is the number I always say. AD. And folks, I know this is bad looking on this lecture, but there's a mosquito that's after me. When Rome fell, it left a power vacuum. I tell you, when I was a kid living in Oklahoma, they had mosquitoes. I got that sucker. Proof. Hope you didn't have a cousin coming around. What I was going to say is the mosquitoes in Oklahoma used to be real big and black, and they were slow and they were easy to kill. But these new mosquitoes are little and quick, and they're hard to get. Okay. Well, Rome fell 476, and it left a power vacuum, and as a consequence, everybody turned to local groups for control, okay, for power. It's like this: if the central government falls, okay, and state governments aren't working, then you turn to the local strongman and say, "Listen, will you protect me?" You know, because folks, right now, you don't mind driving from Ada to Oklahoma City and nothing's going to get you, but if the government, that's because we've got police and highway patrol and the army. You take away all that stuff, and it becomes dangerous out there. And so you turn to the local strongman for control, and that's what people did. And they began to show the local strongman fealty. And what happened was a relationship evolved over a period of time where the under feudalism, where the landowner, the guy who controlled the land, had the wealth. People would agree to work for him, and he would allow them to work his land, and in turn they would pay him a portion of what they earned. And my grandpa was a sharecropper, and maybe some of your ancestors were sharecroppers too. And what my grandpa did is he never owned the land. He would farm the land, and he would give the owner a third of the crop for rent. So it worked out good for grandpa, because if he didn't make a crop, the guy gets a third of nothing. It's not like making a cash rent payment. And in good years, the landlord did well. So you farm thirds, you're sharecropping. Well, that's what happened under feudalism. You have the landowners, the nobility, and then you have the serfs who farm the land. Okay, and they pay rent, and in the form of of what they produce. And they agree that for protection and the use of the land, they will show fealty. They will show loyalty to the landowner. And so that was what happened, what evolved. So what you have is a two-class system. According to Marx, the history of the world is a history of two classes: the haves and the have-nots. The haves got it; they want to keep it. The have-nots want to get it. Okay, and so the haves under feudalism were the nobility. The have-nots were serfs, tenants, and slaves. Okay, so you've got this upper class of the nobility and this underclass, serfs, tenants, and slaves. Okay, and there's a big gap between them. Now, at this time, there was a small group that the nobility encouraged to grow, and they became very, very important. I'm going to write them right over here. And it's called the petty, P-E-T-I-T-E, bourgeoisie, B-O-U-R-G-E-O-I-S-I-E, petty bourgeoisie. Petty means small, okay? Bourgeoisie, words mean something. Bourgeois, okay? Think of burg. When you think of burg, you think of town, okay? Why do we have towns? Towns are for trading, okay? What are the traders called? Businessmen. So it's small businesses, okay? You see the development of small businesses. And these were basically artisans and craftsmen. Craftsmen producing goods, artisans producing artistic qualities. So the craftsman would be somebody like a carpenter, or maybe a stonemason. Artisan would be somebody who makes tapestries, somebody who a sculptor. Okay, so think of it like this: craftsmen produce utilitarian goods. So you got a stonemason. The artistic version would be the what did I just say? The sculptor. Okay. So that's kind of different. You got the difference between a blacksmith, that's practical and applied, and a silversmith, that's artistic. So handicrafts, see these businesses being allowed to grow because they feed into the nobility. All right. So this is our thesis. Feudalism is our thesis. Feudalism is our thesis. And we have the nobility and serfs and slaves, and the beginning of the petty bourgeoisie. Okay, so we go from thesis to antithesis. I think I'm going to run out of space here. Antithesis, which is the opposite. Okay, so the opposite of a very diffuse form of political and economic organization is a highly centralized form of political and economic organization. And so what we have here is called the kingdom state. K-I-N-G-D-O-M. And where you have centralized power. And at the top, you have the nobility who own the land. But you now have the members of the bourgeoisie who've grown powerful. the bourgeoisie. So you got the nobility and the bourgeoisie. The nobility, the basis of the nobility's wealth is land. The basis of the bourgeoisie's wealth is capital. Land is finite, capital is infinite. So the bourgeoisie can get really, really powerful. Okay, now at the bottom, what we've got are the serfs, still working for the nobility, and then we have the proletariat. Proletariat, and these are the workers, okay? These are the workers in the factories, the guys who work for the bourgeoisie. And according to Marx, the gap gets really big. So the haves now are the nobility and the bourgeoisie, the have-nots are the serfs and the proletariat. Now, folks, I use these terms, bourgeoisie and proletariat, because Marx used them. I also use them because you run across them, and as an educated, college-educated person, you need to know some stuff. And you will hear in a magazine, you'll say, oh, they have very bourgeois attitudes. And what that means is that they are business-like. And a lot of times it's pejorative, they're kind of negative, but what they mean is, oh, they're real grasping, okay? Or they'll say proletarian values, and that's working class values. When you time you see the word proletarian, think of working class, people who work in the factories. Okay, so we have thesis, antithesis, and then next we have synthesis. Okay. Now our synthesis, our thesis was feudalism diffuse, kingdom state is centralized. So our synthesis is now capitalism. Capitalism becomes predominant. And what that is individuals owning property, that's diffuse, within the context of a nation state, that's centralized. So that's the synthesis. And under capitalism, we have the bourgeoisie at the top, and at the bottom we have the proletariat. Okay, now the gap gets to be really big here, okay, between the haves and the have-nots, between bourgeoisie and proletariat. And it is this stage that the revolution occurs. But before I do that, okay, what I'm going to do is I want to talk a little bit about capitalism and what it is. And to do that, I need a clean sheet of paper. Oh, you know what? I just figured it out, I think. Maybe not. How in the heck? Just a second, folks. No, I mean, there's page numbers up here. What the heck? That doesn't do it. That doesn't do it. Okay. Try something I couldn't do. Shoot. Well, folks, I'm sorry to hold you up here, but I don't know what to do. I need more space. Okay. Well, okay. I'm not going to have space, so I'm just going to talk to you about it. I want to talk to you about the difference between capitalism, socialism, and communism. Okay? Now, this is not Marx, but this is something that I want to talk about: capitalism, socialism, or communism. And the distinction is fairly simple, and I'm going to make it. Okay? Capitalism has two characteristics: private ownership of property and free markets. Okay, and what that means is that individuals can own the means of production. All right, individuals can own businesses. In some countries, individuals can't own businesses, but in the United States, individuals can own businesses. And there's a free market, which means that you can sell whatever you want as long as it's legal for whatever price you want. Okay, it's a free market, and people are free to buy it or not buy it. Right? So that's capitalism. It's based on freedom, individual freedom, private ownership of property. All right. But let's talk a little bit about socialism. And I want to compare socialism. Well, let me just talk about socialism. Socialism is instead of individuals owning the means of production, governments own the means of production. Okay, so instead of if you look at Ford Motor Company, who owns Ford Motor Company? Well, individual stockholders. Okay, who owns Oklahoma Gas and Electric? Individual stockholders. Who owns utilities in France? The government. Okay, the government owns the means of production. Okay, and distribution, and under socialism. Okay. And there is not a free market economy. There is a centrally planned economy. Okay, so what that means is that the government allocates resources based on what it sees as the need. Now, let me spend a little bit of time talking about this because you guys need to understand this because a bunch of you are going for standards here, and I want you to understand what socialism really is, and understand that some people are socialists who take issue with what I'm going to say, but I'm just kind of telling you this. When the Soviet Union was socialistic, okay, a guy wrote a book about it, and I found it very interesting. He said the way the economy works is that there is a central planning committee in Moscow, and they look at all the resources, all the assets produced in Russia, okay, and then they allocate those resources based on need. So, for example, they'll say, okay, we have so much iron ore, okay, and we need to make tanks and ships, and they decide that, and they'd allocate that, and they produce all that stuff. Or we need to make telephone lines, so we're going to allocate so much copper ore, okay, or timber, or whatever it was, and they would allocate it to the production of these things. Now, that at first blush may seem to be very inefficient to you because what you got are you've got the government, the central planning committee deciding how to assign assets, okay, to the production of various goods and services. The problem is this. The problem is that the government doesn't know what I want, okay? Sometimes I don't even know what I want, but the government, sometimes Washington, D.C. doesn't know what I want. They're out of touch with what I want. I tell you, folks, government does nothing efficiently, nothing, okay? That could not be done better by private enterprise. They do nothing efficiently. And I think I can back that up. I mean, you can argue with me about it if you want, but I don't think they do things efficiently. And what happens is under capitalism, if you come up with a bad business plan, you're eliminated. The marketplace gets rid of you, okay? But the government never goes away because they just raise taxes and so they can keep being inefficient, okay? Let me give you an example. Let's say that you decide that every good Aden family, and this is an example he used in this book, every good Aden family needs a cast iron skillet. And so you go down to the bank, you borrow all this money, you buy all these cast iron skillets, your shelves are stacked to the roof with cast iron skillets, you open your business, and nobody buys them because nobody wants cast iron skillets. Well, you're going to go broke. You can't make your debt service, you're going to go broke, okay? Well, in Russia, the government decided the same thing. Every good Russian family needs a cast iron skillet. The problem was that they didn't like them. They wanted stainless steel skillets. So the shelves would be stacked to the roof with cast iron skillets that nobody wanted. And then when they got in something that people wanted, they had to stand in these long lines waiting. So the allocation of goods and services was not efficient, okay? Whereas over here, you come up with a bad business model, you're eliminated. They get rid of you. You go broke and you're out of there, okay? So what we end up with in capitalist countries is we end up with very efficient system. We end up with businesses that can make a go of it, okay? But when you're relying on the government can keep screwing up over and over again, and they keep raising taxes, and they can keep, and you don't get rid of them, okay? So that's the basic complaint that I have, and the argument that this guy was making is that socialism is very, very inefficient. Okay, so let's talk now a little bit about communism. On a large scale level, there is no such thing as communism. It does not exist. Okay, because here's the deal. Okay, communism means communal ownership of the means of production. Well, if it's communally owned, if we all own it together, somebody's got to run it. Who's going to run it? The government, right? So what do you have? Socialism. So there is no, on a large scale level, there's only socialism. There is no communism. Now, communism does exist on a small scale. It exists in your family, for example, okay? Communal ownership of the means of production and distribution of goods and services, okay? Your dad and your mom probably make more money than you do right now, okay? They work as hard as they can. They bring your money home. They take care of you and your siblings, okay? And they allocate on the basis of what they see your needs to be. And they know you, and they know that you're in school and you need more money than your little brother, okay? Your mother doesn't bring home a load of groceries and say, stay the hell away from that. That's my groceries. So, no, it's the family's groceries, right? Yeah, they belong to everybody. Everybody can share in these things. And that's communal organization, and it works on a small level where you know the people that are benefiting, you know, that you are benefiting, and it works, okay? But on a large scale, it doesn't work, because the way they intended is they take my tax dollars and they give it to people I've never seen, never heard of, unaccountable. So people are less willing to support that kind of situation. Okay, so we've got this difference between capitalism and socialism, and you know, and I think that capitalism is much more efficient. Let's continue with Marxist theory. So we have our synthesis is capitalism, which becomes the new thesis, right? And under capitalism, there is a revolution. And the revolution occurs because the gap between the haves and the have-nots gets so large that the have-nots overthrow the rich, okay? Take away the means of production, right? And this revolution is possible because there is class consciousness. People become aware of themselves as a class and begin to work for the betterment of their class. There are leaders that emerge. They communicate about the importance of having this revolution, and there's a call to action, and the revolution takes place. Okay. So capitalism is the synthesis that becomes the new thesis. The antithesis is the dictatorship of the proletariat, and I'm going to write that down here. This isn't going to look pretty, but of the proletariat. And the idea is that in order to redistribute the wealth, take it from the rich, give it to the poor, you got to have some kind of dictatorship. It's going to be the dictatorship of the working class. And then finally, the state will wither away, yielding pure communism. Okay, that's Marxist theory. You know what? I just remembered I left something out. Okay, let me reintroduce something. Okay, and I left out. I mean, it's not too bad. I know it screws up your notes a little bit, and everything I've said so far is true. But let me talk about this. Marx identified 3 stages in the development of capitalism. I should have said that when I was over here. 3 stages in the development of capitalism, the evolution of capitalism. Okay, so we were talking about capitalism, socialism. I should have put it in right there. Okay, so it's just a little bit back. All right, so here we go. I'm trying to minimize my mistake. All right, 3 stages in capitalism. There are 3 stages. I'd like to write these down, but boy, I don't know where. This is crazy that I can't do another page. This is aggravating. Wait a minute. Nope, I didn't do it. Well, let's see here. What's this do? Oh, baby. About this. Oh, man. This is good, but I think I'm still going to run out of room. I am. What's that do? Whoa. We don't need that. Whoa. I'm trying to get that smaller. There we go. Jeez. Let's see if I can get out of that. Okay. Okay. You know what I'm going to do? Let me see if I can sneak it in right over here. This is bad. I got to figure out how to do this. Okay, I'm going to put it right. Well, I can't. I Can't put it in any place. Let me see about the bottom there. This is just not right. Say. All right. Well, I'm not going to be able to do it. Okay. Try to figure this out so the next lecture I'll do a better job. The 3 stages in capitalism. The first stage is cooperation. Okay. And you've got to ask yourself, why do people go into business? And the answer is they go into business to make money, right? For profits. That's what they're trying to do. People go into business. So here you got this guy, he makes shoes. He's a cobbler. And he's making his shoes, and he does everything himself. You know, he kills the cow, tans the hide, cuts out the leather, molds it, sews it, and sells it. Okay, he does everything. But he wants to make more money. Okay, that's why he does it. That's why I teach. That's why anybody does whatever they do. They want to make money. So he's trying to make money, and he's thinking, you know, I've got all these tools, but I only use one tool at a time. If I could bring somebody in, okay, another skilled craftsman, we could alternate using my tools, okay, and I'd have to pay him a big wage because he's skilled, and he could work on his own. So to keep him from going off and competing with me, I need to give him a good wage. But we could alternate using my tools. I could double my production. I could make more money. So he brings somebody in, okay, and that works so great. He brings somebody else in, right? And so he's making more shoes. He's making more money. His sales revenue's up. He's making more money. His profits are up. But then he starts thinking, you know, my major expense here are my skilled craftsmen. I have to pay them so much. And it's just eating into my bottom line. So he reads about this machine that they make in Germany. And what it is a machine, and all you got to do is feed in pieces of leather. And the machine cuts it out automatically and molds it and sews it and spits out shoes. The problem is it takes quite a bit of capital investment. He's got to pony up some money to do it. But he can get rid of his skilled craftsmen, okay, that he has to pay a real high wage to. So he decides to do it. Okay, that gets us from the stage of cooperation, where you have several skilled craftsmen working together to produce goods, to the stage of manufacture. Okay, now manufacture, you can hire unskilled workers because you don't have to know a lot to just stick the leather in the machine. Okay, and so he can hire unskilled workers for cheap. He has to pay a lot for the machine, but he can increase his output. Okay. Now, Marx kind of liked the first stage, cooperation, but he absolutely hated the second stage, manufacture, okay, because he felt that it led to 2 things which he absolutely despised, okay. One is exploitation, the other is alienation, okay. Exploitation and alienation, let me tell you what they are. Exploitation, now let me do alienation first. Alienation is when the worker becomes alienated from the tools of production. He no longer feels good about producing what he's producing. Let me tell you how this works. You guys have all made something. You make a birdhouse or a dog house, or you bake a cake, or you do something, and it's hard work, and you do it, but then you have a sense of pride about it, right? When you get done, you look at it, and you think, man, I did that. Well, I used to build houses in South Carolina, and I'll tell you, I would hire these guys. They were ne'er-do-wells. They all had alcohol problems. They'd all been to prison. They were good old guys, don't get me wrong, but they were, if you looked at them, they looked like a crew of rough fellas. So we'd be working on a house, and then in the end of the day, we'd get our tools up, and invariably those guys would turn and look at what they've done, and you could see the pride in their eyes. It's very satisfying to frame up a house. You feel good about what you've done. You know it's going to be there for 50 years, right? And you have this good feeling about it. Well, according to Marx, workers who do just segmented tasks don't feel that way, okay? They feel alienated from the work process. Rather than feeling good about it, they hate it. They become controlled by the assembly line, and they feel, you know, and their pace of work, they have no control anymore, and they don't like it. Okay, that's one problem. The other problem, according to Marx, is exploitation. And he said, he looked at the kind of money that the businessmen get. and how much the worker gets. And he's thinking, hey, these guys are getting rich on the backs of the workers. I mean, the workers are doing the work, and the businessman is getting rich. And he uses this theory. It's called the labor theory of value. And the argument is that the price of goods essentially ought to be based on the price of the material and the price of the labor it takes to turn that material into a good, and not what he felt that the owner should only be making what a worker makes, okay, and that anything above that was exploitive of the worker. Now, I want to address that real quick because that's I think a misconception, okay? And here's how it goes, folks. Here's the deal. If I could have made as much working as a carpenter on somebody else's job site as I did as a builder owning my own company, I would be a fool to take the risk, okay, that I had to take. I'd be a fool to borrow the money to buy the land, to buy the framing package, to pay the workers. I'd be a fool if I could make just as much going over and working with somebody else, okay? And so, why take the risk, okay? So the point is that to encourage people to take the risk, you've got to have the carrot out there. You've got to have people willing to take a chance to get rich. The thing that is going to encourage them to take a chance is the fact that they can get rich. And if you take that away, people aren't going to do it. Why would I work so hard? Why would I take it? In class, I usually illustrate it with with the shirt I'm wearing. I ask the students, what do you think this shirt costs? And they give me some lowball numbers because the shirt looks like junk. And I say, no, this shirt sells for $70, but I buy it on deep discount. But I say, did the worker make $70? And the answer is no. Did the material cost $70? No. And so the worker and the material probably was $5. And so the businessman is making that huge profit. But the point is that the businessman, before he made $1, had to buy reams of material, contract with sewing shops, had to front all this money before he sold one shirt, and he didn't even know if he'd sell a shirt, right? It's a risk. And if he could make as much work, making shirts, why take the risk? You've got to have the profit out there to encourage people to take a chance. If not, everybody's going to want to work for everybody else, and nobody's going to create jobs. So job creation is critical for job creation. Now, there's another part to this too. If the businessman is charging so much for his product, don't buy it. If in jewelry stores they'll have half of a half sale and they're still making money on it. Don't pay full price. Just wait. It'll go on sale. If nobody buys it, believe me, they'll lower the price to clear the market. So it's your choice. Nobody holds a gun to your head and says buy that ring or buy that watch. It's your choice. Don't buy it. The price will come down. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm sorry I forgot that. But let's go back with what we're done with the theory now. Okay. The end point was we have this dictatorship of the proletariat, and then the state withers away, yielding pure communism. What I want to do now, and we're about done, so hang on there. I know it's a long chapter. What I want to do now is I want to, what the heck? You are sharing Windows whiteboard. Well, maybe that's okay. What I want to do is critique Marx, okay? And I have several critiques. Okay, first of all, the state does not wither away. He has decided to say. And the reason the state doesn't wither away is because people have vested interest in maintaining the state, okay? Let me give you an example. Here's my example. When I was a little kid, we had polio. I didn't, but all little kids had polio. And so they were trying to get research dollars together to find a cure, and they did. They had this march of dimes. As little kids, they had these little placards around. We put dimes in, and they took the money, and they found it. They found the cure, okay? Did the organization which was set up to find a cure, did it go away? Did it wither away? No. Why? Because it represented people's jobs. Once they cured polio, they thought, hey, we're out of a job. We got to do something else. And so they started thinking, well, what else can we do? So today, I don't know what they're on. They're on something. They'll never run out of work because it represents people's jobs. Bureaucracies never get smaller, hardly ever. You've got to go in with a meat axe to get them small. What they typically do is get bigger. Okay, that's just the way of it. They get bigger and more entrenched. So Marx was a fool to think that would happen. Marx argued we have a two-class society, an industrial society. That's hokum. There's no way. You look at all the different jobs we have. Okay, he used the two-class model because it fit in with his political thesis. He wanted to justify a revolution, and to do that, he had to have two classes. The only way this bottom class is going to get ahead is by destroying that upper class. So that was his basic idea. The theory just didn't work like he said it would. Every revolution that has taken place in world history under the name of Marx has taken place not in an industrial society, but in an agrarian society. China, 47. Were they industrialized? No. Cuba, 57, I think. Were they industrialized? No. North Korea? No. I mean, whatever the USSR, you know, and in 1916, Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. No, they weren't. So none of them were industrialized. So it didn't work like he said, and we don't have a two-class system. I'll tell you, folks, I just want to end with this. Some of your professors are socialists. I know because they told me they are. Socialism has never worked. It's never worked, okay? Because it's inefficient, because governments don't do good jobs allocating resources. Markets do. People making free choices are efficient, okay? I'm a free market capitalist, and I'm very comfortable with that position. Okay, enough politicizing. I'm done. I'll see you guys next time. We're going to talk about it'll be chapter 9 and its exchange theory. Adios.